What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to settle the debate between which investment is better, Section 8 rentals or non-Section 8 rentals, more professionally referred to as market rate rentals. So with that being said, let's jump into it. To set the stage, I've been investing in real estate for the last 10 years. I own 120 plus market rate rentals, and over the last year, I started acquiring Section 8 rentals, and I've got about a dozen of those. I've been very fearful over the years of jumping into Section 8 rentals, especially buying out-of-state rentals, not in the current location that I live. However, this last year, I've gone crazy, and I'm hoping to buy over 100 units out of state. The majority of these will be Section 8 rentals. The reason I share this with you is I have a lot of perspective when it comes to normal rentals compared to Section 8 rentals, the pros and cons of both. I'm also going to share with you what I believe to be the best investment between the two of them. I want to be very upfront in saying that there are lots of people out there that do Section 8 rentals. There are lots of people out there that are adamantly opposed to them. And I believe a lot of this content is sensationalized just to get clicks and views. And so I'm going to try and give you a very fair and real description of both of them, all of the pros and cons, so that you can make a good decision. First, let's talk about the pros of Section 8 rentals, and the biggest pro is that this is backed by the government, so it's guaranteed rent. The other massive pro with Section 8 is the vast majority of the time, you can get higher rents for a particular unit with a Section 8 tenant than you could with a market rate tenant. What this means is when you're shopping out deals, you might have something that if you get Section 8, it would be a $1,400 in rent, where alternatively the market for rents, if you're not Section 8, might be $1,200 or $1,100. This is one of the big reasons people love Section 8 rentals, is it's very apparent right off the bat you're getting more in rents. Another pro of Section 8 is statistically they are more likely to stay in the unit for a longer period of time, and this can be advantageous. Now, this doesn't mean this is always the case with every tenant, but statistically, that's more likely the case. Another pro is every year you can request higher rents so that those rents are increasing, and as long as that gets approved, that's something that can consistently happen for you. The last pro I want to add is a lot of people will say there's a larger tenant pool because there are lots of people with vouchers. I would say this isn't always the case, and it's more dependent on your location. Now let's talk about the cons. First off, the biggest con is the bureaucracy. There are so many hoops you've got to jump through when it comes to the paperwork side of things and making sure that the property is up to snuff so that you can get approved to get a Section 8 tenant into your building. I think another con is you have a little bit more limited tenant screening. What I mean by this is because they got approved for Section 8 housing, unfortunately, you are looking at tenants where if you're pulling credit, looking at background, all of that stuff, you don't have as many options for a super high quality tenant as you would just renting it out market rate. I think another potential con is you are tapped out as far as what the max rents are that you can get. And so if you're trying to use Section 8 in the wrong areas, it can be something that's actually a disadvantage because you could have a unit that could rent more at market rents that if you try to put Section 8 in there, it could end up costing you rents to where you're not getting what you should be. The next con is perception, and this comes through in a couple different ways. It could affect your resale value if you've got Section 8 tenants in the building because some people might be turned off by this. You also are just going to get viewed a little bit as a slumlord, which from my experience has not been the case and maybe even opposite of the case because they do have a pretty high standard of what you have to keep these buildings up to before putting people into them. And so even though I disagree with that, I do think the second people hear Section 8, they think, oh, they must be a slumlord. Finally, and this is one of those bigger cons that I don't hear talked about as much, and that is that Section 8 tenants most likely are not going out to their job as much as normal market rate tenants are. And so a lot of times they're staying in the building a lot more. This means a lot more wear and tear for your building. So when vetting tenants, not only do you have less quality, I would say, to pull from when it comes to people that are going to take care of the property, but they're going to be in that property a lot more, giving it wear and tear. One thing I want to add to these cons is I don't want this to come off in the wrong way. There are phenomenal tenants that get vouchers that are in the Section 8 program, and I've had great experiences with those phenomenal tenants, especially if you know how to vet them properly. There are better Section 8 tenants and not so good Section 8 tenants, and again, as long as you're vetting them properly, you can still get great tenants in these these units. All right, now let's jump over to non-Section 8, or more professionally referred to as market rate rentals. To start with the pros, I would say one of the biggest ones is you have full control over tenant screening. This means you can look at their credit, their background, their income, job history, all of these things, and sift through all of the available tenants and pick the absolute best one for your particular property. This isn't to say you can't do screening with Section 8 tenants, but you just have a lot more options and more control. Another big pro is you can have much faster turnaround, and I should have mentioned this in the cons of Section 8 housing, but I've had experiences with Section 8 where it can take 1, 2, even 3 months to make sure all of the paperwork and everything is in place and finding the right tenant to get into these units. Or you run into the other bureaucracy of getting a Section 8 tenant, where alternatively, once your unit is ready, once you find the tenant, you can have an immediate turnaround to get that tenant into your unit. Another big pro is flexibility in pricing. You get to pick your price, and it is totally dependent on the market, but you could also wait and go above market if you wanted to, because again, that comes down to your listing and what tenant you choose at what price. Where Section 8, it's totally dependent on what the government is willing to pay, and that's just what you have to be okay with, where this, you can set your pricing freely. Another big pro is the lack of regulation. You have so much more freedom, so much less bureaucracy, and that makes things run smoother, and it's a lot less stressful overall. Another pro is the quality of the property. The reality is it's hard to make the numbers work on Section 8 in a brand new apartment, because you can get more market rate rents than what the government is offering. And so when you are finding good deals, market rate rentals wise, you're able to find higher quality properties. Alternatively, Section 8 properties, you're usually dealing with older, C plus properties. Finally, there's just less wear and tear on the buildings when you're not renting to Section 8 tenants. I think the biggest reason for this is a lot of times market rate tenants just aren't at home during the day because they're going out and busy with jobs and life and other things, where historically, from what I've seen and I know others have seen, Section 8 tenants are home in their units a lot more of the time. All right, now let's talk about the cons. One of the biggest ones being that rent isn't guaranteed. It is awesome when your rent is coming from the government because it shows up every single month. Or alternatively, sometimes you have tenants that you think you've screened properly and then they just don't pay. Another con is you do have more turnover risk, especially depending on the kind of property that you're using. Now, I'd say this isn't the case when I've had an actual house that I'm renting, but a lot of times with apartments, you do just have a lot more consistent turnover, where I haven't seen that so much with Section 8 tenants. This next one is similar to what we already talked about, but there's a lot more income volatility. You've got to deal with people not paying, people paying late, people running into issues where you're dealing with the evictions or whatever else. There are just lots of things that can happen where that income isn't coming in. Where with a Section 8 tenant, again, the government is sending it as long as you've done everything that you need to do, and the tenant's doing everything that they need to do, the money just keeps rolling in. This last con is kind of unique because it was also a potential con with Section 8, but that is that you could have longer vacancy. If you don't list the property properly, or it's not in good shape to get a tenant in there, you've got bad management, whatever it is, you could have an extended period of time where you've got vacancy, and this could cost you dearly, where if you're dealing with a Section 8 tenant, it might take a while to actually get them in there through the approval process. But again, depending on how good you are at one or the other, you could still have bad vacancy either way. Now, I've covered all of these pros and cons, and so if you've stuck this far in the video, you're waiting to hear which I prefer and why, and so here's my answer. I would say I still lean towards enjoying purchasing market rate rentals more than Section 8 rentals, just because I don't like all of the hoops that you need to jump through when it comes to dealing with the government. The other reason I prefer these is because a lot of times you're just dealing with a higher quality property and tenants that, from my experience, just take care of the property better. And so if you're vetting your tenants properly, it just is all around easier, and it's a little bit easier to take pride in those properties and drive by them and have interactions with those tenants that leave you feeling overall better. Now, from my experience hiring proper management, you can still get a lot of that with Section 8 tenants. The real reason that I've enjoyed purchasing Section 8 properties is because the cash flow is crazy on these properties. Now, I'm assuming my appreciation won't be as much, but I'm getting upwards of 30-35% cash on cash returns on these properties, even expecting higher expenses. And so far from the properties that I've purchased, and again, I've been purchasing them for over a year now, I haven't really had higher expenses because we have vetted and got really good tenants in the ones I've purchased. And that's why I'm wanting to buy a lot more. Now, if my entire portfolio was Section 8 housing, I think that would make me uncomfortable because I'm not huge into massive diversification. But when it comes to real estate, I really like the idea of having some of my units be dependent on the government paying me, and other units be dependent on the market and more appreciation because I'm buying a slightly higher quality property. And I think that combination offsets itself, where I can have a lot stronger cash flow from my Section 8 purchases while also getting appreciation and still great cash flow from my market rate rentals. Again, I think people get very bullish on one or the other, and historically, I've been the person that said, yeah, I'm not gonna touch Section 8 rentals because they come with all of these risks. But I think that's the last point that I would really drive home, is whether you're doing commercial real estate, residential real estate, dealing with Section 8, doing flex space, whatever you're doing in real estate or anything else, if you are doing it better than everyone else, or even in the top 10%, you're going to crush it. You're going to see lots of success. You're going to have tons of upside. And so if you run into someone and they say, oh, you're an absolute idiot for doing market rate rentals or commercial real estate or Section 8 real estate, I just think that they're being sensational. I think that they're trying to get clicks and views, or even worse, they don't understand that you can be successful in anything if you dial in your systems. So if you're torn, I think the biggest mistake people make isn't necessarily investing in the wrong thing. It's that they don't get their systems in place, and then they don't go in 100% at becoming the best at whatever they're investing in. Now, I really believe I'm one of the best at purchasing these normal market rate rentals and finding ways to add value. And now I'm wanting to become the best at purchasing Section 8 rentals and wanting to become the best at purchasing commercial real estate. And I've come to find that as long as I dial in those systems, I get proper management, I truly can be great at all of these things. But if I was trying to be great at all of these things from the beginning, I think everything would have been a shiny object, and I would have wasted a lot of time. I would have invested improperly, and I wouldn't have gotten really good at the rentals that I did get good at, so that then I could diversify from there. So if you don't have any rentals right now, I would say just pick one and get really good at it and then diversify. If you're someone that's scaling and thinking about going into Section 8, or you have a lot of Section 8 and you're thinking of buying something else, I think that's a good idea, because I do think once you've had success in one, it's a good idea to diversify a little bit and get better in a couple other things as well. Now, if you enjoyed the video, remember to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell. It would mean the world to me. And thanks so much for coming. We'll see you next time.